My mom kicked me and my kids out of Thanksgiving after I spent years supporting them financially. She said there was no room for us at the table. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Here, I share stories based on popular Reddit threads about family, friends, and life struggles. Today's story focuses on a character named Drew, who's been pushed to his breaking point by his family's constant demands and manipulation. He has spent years supporting them financially, but when they refuse to show up for him in his time of need, he finally takes a stand. Have you ever felt like Drew? Have you ever had to make a tough decision to protect yourself and your loved ones? Stick around to see how Drew navigates this intense situation and what he learns along the way. If you enjoy the story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. Your support helps me bring more compelling stories to life. I've always believed that hard work pays off, but it seems the universe doesn't always agree. I'm Drew, formerly Jake, a 34-year-old guy trying to keep my head above water. I'm a construction worker, busting my back every day to make ends meet. But somehow, that's never enough. My story doesn't start with luxury. It starts with struggle and sacrifice. I'm raising two kids, Leah and Mason, after their mother, Kelly, left when they were young. She thought she'd find happiness in Arizona with some fitness instructor, and just like that, we were left to pick up the pieces. Since then, it's been just me and them, making do in a small two-bedroom apartment in the rundown part of the city. The kind of place where the heat doesn't always work, the plumbing is a joke, and you patch up leaks with duct tape instead of calling the landlord. But it's not the apartment or the shitty heating system that gets to me. It's the fact that every paycheck I get, I send a chunk of it to my mother and stepfather, Todd. They live in a huge house on the other side of town, a place where everything is pristine and perfect. It's funny how that works, right? I'm the one slaving away, and they're living their life in luxury while I scrape by. And the worst part? Every time I go to visit them, it's like I'm invisible. My mom doesn't care about my kids. It's not even about the money anymore. It's about the constant judgment, the way she treats my kids like they're some sort of burden. My son Mason has autism, and I've noticed how they look at him, whispering behind his back. But I kept giving. I kept sending money because that's what you do for family, right? You give until there's nothing left. Thanksgiving had always been a big deal for us. It wasn't just another holiday. It was the one time of the year when everything felt normal. My mom, despite everything, still managed to make it special. The house would smell like turkey roasting in the oven, mashed potatoes piled high, and all those fancy appetizers that I could never quite pronounce the names of. It was the only time I could truly pretend everything was okay. I could see the joy in my kids' eyes as they tore into everything with excitement, oblivious to the battles I fought behind the scenes to make sure they had something to eat. This year, however, felt different. It felt like the one time I could finally get a break. Just one time where things weren't falling apart. But as I sat there in our tiny, broken apartment with Leah and Mason, my heart sank when I thought about this year's Thanksgiving. Things were tighter than ever. Bills piled up like the dirty laundry we never had time to wash. My truck, which had been on the verge of dying for weeks, was barely getting by. The heater in our apartment made this annoying rattling noise that just wouldn't go away. And to top it off, the plumbing was backing up again. That's when I realized, this year, there wasn't going to be the usual Thanksgiving feast. The last thing I wanted to do was show up empty-handed. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let Leah and Mason feel the emptiness that seemed to be creeping into our lives every year. So I made the call. I dialed my mom's number, and as usual, the nerves started to get to me. Asking her for help had never been easy, but this year, I had no choice. Maybe she'll understand this time, I thought. Just for this one time, maybe she could float me the money until payday. I wasn't asking for much, just enough to get through Thanksgiving. Enough to feed my kids, to give them a semblance of normalcy. But when her voice came through on the other end, it hit me like a freight train. I could barely even process it. It didn't make sense. The words that came out of her mouth were too sharp, too cold. Drew, we're keeping it small this year. Ashley's hosting and she's got everything covered. I really don't think there's room for you and your kids this time. Ashley, my half-sister, The one who had always been the favorite in Mom's eyes, even though she had done nothing to earn it. The one who'd never worked a day in her life but had always had everything handed to her on a silver platter. She owned a boutique salon that catered to rich women who couldn't even spell working class. And she was doing just fine, living the life I could only dream of. Meanwhile, I was here working myself into the ground, making sure my kids didn't go to bed hungry. All that effort, all that sweat, all that sacrifice, and it didn't even matter. And now, my mom was saying there was no space for us at the table. No room for Leah and Mason. I felt the blood rush to my ears as the words sank in. My heart hammered in my chest, and all I could do was stare blankly at the wall in front of me, unable to comprehend what she just said. Felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I didn't say anything right away. I could hear her still talking on the other end of the line, but the words seemed distant, like they were coming from underwater. "You're overreacting, Drew," she said. "Ashley's kids are delicate. They've been through so much, and they need a quiet, peaceful holiday. You know how it is with them, too much noise, too much chaos. Your kids just aren't the right fit for our family's plans this year." The words hit harder than I could have imagined. I hung up the phone without another word, my hand trembling slightly as I placed the receiver down. I didn't know what to do. My chest felt tight, and my head was spinning. How could she say that? How could she treat us like this after all these years? That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with the same thoughts over and over again. I couldn't shake the image of my mom's voice, cold and indifferent, as she casually brushed us aside. The people I had been sacrificing everything for, the people I'd been pouring my heart and soul into, had just dismissed me. Dismissed Leah and Mason. I kept thinking about all the years I had spent giving them money, how I'd paid for their vacations, their dinners at overpriced restaurants, their extravagant gifts that they didn't even appreciate. Every time they called, every time they needed something, I was the one who dropped everything to help. I did it because they were family, because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. But when it was my turn, when I needed the smallest bit of help, I got nothing in return. It wasn't just about the money, it was the principle of it all. The betrayal. The fact that my mother didn't even care enough to offer us a simple place at the table. I had given everything to them, and yet, when I asked for one small favor, it was too much. The next morning, I woke up with a decision on my mind. I wasn't going to keep this up anymore. I was done being the family's ATM. Done being the one who was always expected to give without ever getting anything in return. Enough was enough. I was going to take control of my life. I opened my laptop, my fingers shaking as I logged into the bank account. The list of automatic payments stared back at me. Mortgage, car loans, utilities, and the countless transfers I'd made to my mom and Todd over the years. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't hesitate. I canceled every single one. The mortgage, the car loan, all of it. I was done. For once, I wasn't going to be the one who kept sacrificing everything while they lived like royalty. For once, I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me any longer. I wasn't going to be their financial crutch anymore. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but there was also this empty feeling in my chest. I knew the fallout would come. I knew they'd try to reach out, beg for money, guilt trip me into giving them more. But this time, I wasn't going to budge. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control. I was no longer at the mercy of their whims. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe again. Hey, are you finding the story interesting so far? If you are, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can continue the adventure together. The best part is just ahead. The first few days after I cut them off, I felt a sense of power I hadn't experienced in years. It was liberating, like breathing for the first time in a long while. It wasn't just about the money, it was the control. The feeling that, for once, I wasn't the one who was always expected to give. For once, I wasn't the one constantly trying to fix everything. I could feel my body physically release the tension I'd been holding onto for so long. The weight that had been on my shoulders, of being the provider, the fixer, the one who kept the family afloat, was gone. The best part was, I didn't feel guilty. Felt so damn good. But that wasn't the end of it. The phone calls started coming almost immediately. First, it was my mom. Her voice, always so sweet and familiar, now felt like a knife through my chest. She tried to act like nothing had changed, like the last few weeks hadn't happened, like I hadn't just told her, in no uncertain terms, that I was done. But the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. "Drew, honey, I know things are tough right now, but we really need your help. The heating system is down, and we need it fixed for Thanksgiving. It's cold in here, and I don't know what to do without you." There it was. The same old manipulation. She was doing it again. I could hear Todd in the background, his voice low and almost pleading, but not quite as convincing as hers. It was the same pattern. Talk to me like I'm a child, make me feel like I'm the one who's being unreasonable, then guilt-trip me into fixing everything. But this time, I didn't budge. I let the phone ring. Felt almost surreal. The calls kept coming, but I ignored them. For once, I wasn't the one on the other end, begging to help, running around trying to fix their problems. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't the person they could turn to anymore. They couldn't make me feel guilty. I wasn't going to let them. Then the messages started flooding in. It was a full-on attack. Texts, voice notes, all from my mom, from Todd. The usual. "Why are you doing this? You're ruining everything. You've taken so much from us already. Why do you have to be so heartless? We've given you so much over the years. Why can't you just help us one more time?" That last one stung. I could feel my jaw tighten as I read it. "We've given you so much." The irony was almost too much to bear. What had they ever really given me? They had taken from me for years. For as long as I could remember, it was always me giving. Always me paying for their mistakes, picking up their slack, paying for things that should have been their responsibility. Every time they needed help, I was the one who showed up, and they never gave anything back. And now, they wanted to turn the tables and make me feel guilty for cutting them off? For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally in control. I wasn't the one being drained anymore. I wasn't the one left with nothing. I could breathe again. But that feeling of control didn't last long. Todd started calling me again, and this time he wasn't alone. He called up every one of their friends, anyone who might listen. He was trying to get them to lend him money for Thanksgiving. It was pathetic. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who had spent years living off of my hard work, borrowing money for his luxury vacations, his ridiculous sports car payments, was now calling people he barely knew to try to scrape together enough to survive the holiday. And Ashley, she wasn't any better. She kept whining about how her salon was struggling, how her clients weren't paying enough, how the bills were piling up. To be honest, I could barely muster the energy to care. Why should I? She had never once cared about me or my family. She had the privilege of living her life like a rich, pampered princess, never once having to lift a finger. Her struggles were nothing compared to mine. And yet, she kept calling, texting me with her usual sob story, telling me how unfair everything was, how it wasn't her fault that she was in this situation. The whole thing made me sick. I couldn't even bring myself to pick up the phone. But there was something worse than hearing their voices, something even more painful than the guilt they were trying to impose on me. The worst part was watching my kids go through it. Leah and Mason were watching everything unfold. They could see the frustration on my face, the way I clenched my jaw every time the phone rang, the way my hands shook with anger every time I saw another text from Mom or Todd. They didn't understand it all, of course. They were too young to fully grasp the dynamics of family, of manipulation, of being used. But they could feel the tension, and I could see it in their eyes. It hurt them to see their grandma treating them like second-class citizens. It hurt them to know that while Ashley's kids were being treated like royalty, they were left out in the cold. It hurt me to see them hurt, but I couldn't back down. I had to be strong for them. I had to show them that this wasn't how family should be. This wasn't love. This was manipulation, this was guilt, this was exploitation. And I wasn't going to let them treat my family like that anymore. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about the decision I'd made. It wasn't easy, even if it felt right. There were moments when I doubted myself. What if I'd gone too far? What if I was ruining my relationship with my mom for good? But then I remembered how many times I had let her down, how many times I had let Todd treat me like I was disposable. I couldn't keep doing that. The reality was sinking in. I was standing my ground, but I was still in pain. I wasn't immune to the emotional turmoil. There were times I missed the old days, the days when things were simpler, when my mom would cook dinner for us all and we'd sit around the table laughing together. But those days were gone. The family I had known was a lie, and I couldn't keep pretending it was anything else. I had to let go of the idea that my family was going to change. They had shown me who they were, and now I had to accept that reality. As I sat in our small apartment, trying to keep my kids entertained and shield them from the mess going on outside, I realized something. I had been fighting for my family for so long that I had forgotten what it meant to fight for myself. This was my time to fight for me, for my happiness, my peace of mind, and my future. And if that meant cutting off the toxic ties that had bound me for so long, then that's exactly what I was going to do. Then came Thanksgiving Day. My phone started ringing off the hook. Texts, calls, everyone was freaking out. It was all happening at once. Like the universe had lined up the perfect storm just for me. The heating was out at my mom's place. The caterer couldn't even get in because the security system had been locked down. They were losing everything. And for the first time in years, I felt nothing. I had made sure their credit cards were maxed out, their utilities were cut off, and their once pristine home had now become a cold, dark shell. They were sitting there, panicking, trying to fix things they'd ignored for so long. I hadn't lifted a finger. I hadn't even made a call. But the world they had carefully built, the image of perfection they had so desperately clung to, was crumbling, and it was all because of me. Every dollar I'd pulled, every automatic payment I had canceled, it had all led to this moment. I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't just the relief of having control. It was the satisfaction of watching them finally feel the consequences of their actions. All those years I spent picking up their pieces, feeding into their image of entitlement, all the while being treated like a lesser person in my own family. Now, for the first time, I wasn't the one cleaning up their mess. I wasn't the one rushing to fix everything for them. Meanwhile, at my place, things were different. Leah and Mason woke up to a warm apartment. The heater was working. There was no freezing cold, no panic, no desperation. We had the simplest Thanksgiving dinner. A store-bought turkey breast, mashed potatoes, and canned corn. But it was made with love. No fancy appetizers, no elaborate dishes, just a meal prepared with genuine care. We didn't need all the pretension. We didn't need the designer clothes, the extravagant meals, or the luxury. We had each other. And for the first time in ages, that felt like more than enough. I didn't have to look at my phone to feel validated anymore. I didn't need their approval or their false praise. My kids were happy. They were safe. And for the first time in years, I wasn't living under the shadow of my family's expectations. I didn't care about the grand dinners, the expensive gifts, or the judgments from my mother and Todd. What mattered was that I could look at my kids and know that they were free from the toxicity of that world. That night, after Leah and Mason went to bed, I sat in the kitchen, sipping on a cup of coffee, the warmth from the mug spreading through my hands. I felt calm. For the first time in a long time, I could sit in silence and just be. I didn't have to worry about the next phone call, the next request for money. I didn't have to dread hearing my mom's voice, pretending everything was fine, only to be used again. But then the text came. It was from my mom. "I'm so sorry. We've lost everything. Can you help us?" I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling my pulse quicken. There it was again, the same old manipulative tone, the same old guilt trip. "We've lost everything." She was trying to make me feel sorry for her, trying to make me think that somehow I was the one who was responsible for their downfall. I let the text sit there for a moment longer, the words burning through my mind. "We've lost everything." The words echoed in my head, but they didn't hit me like they used to. They didn't have the same power over me anymore. I was done being manipulated, done being the one they turned to when things went wrong. I didn't reply. I simply put my phone down and went back to my coffee. That was the last time I would allow myself to fall for it. The next few days passed in a blur of silence. The phone calls kept coming, but I ignored them. It was the first time in years I hadn't felt obligated to pick up. I knew what they wanted. I knew what they'd say, but I wasn't going to listen anymore. Then, just when I thought the storm had passed, I heard a knock on the door. It was quiet at first, barely audible, but then the knocking grew more insistent. I opened the door and there she was, my mom. But she didn't look like the woman I had grown up with. She looked broken, tired, defeated. Her hair was messier than I'd ever seen it, and she wasn't wearing the usual stylish clothes. The makeup was smudged, and there was a sadness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She looked like someone who had been through hell and come out the other side, unsure of who she was anymore. "Drew," she said softly, her voice cracking, "I've made a huge mistake. I've lost everything. I was wrong. Please? Can you help me?" I looked at her for a long moment. My heart didn't soften. It didn't break. Stayed still, cold. This wasn't the woman I had been desperately trying to please for years. This was a woman who had made choices, and those choices had consequences. "You were wrong, Mom," I said, my voice steady, without an ounce of emotion. "But it's too late. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be fixed. I've been the one picking up your pieces for years, and now it's my turn to fix my life." She stood there in silence, her eyes filling with tears. I know I was wrong. I've been so selfish. I don't know how to fix this. But Drew, please, can't we just start over?" I shook my head. "No. I've learned the hard way that family doesn't always come first. Sometimes you have to cut the toxic ties that hold you back in order to move forward. I'm done with the guilt, the manipulation, the pretending. I'm not going back to that life. I've got my kids to think about now." Her tears streamed down her face, but I didn't flinch. Couldn't. For too long, I had let her manipulate me, let her control my life with her needs, her demands. I wasn't going to do that anymore. She reached out, as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "I can't help you anymore, Mom. You need to figure this out yourself." The door closed softly behind her, and I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading away. I didn't feel the relief I thought I would feel. There was no grand moment of triumph. It was just done, and that was all I needed. So what do you think? Do you agree with Drew's decision? Or do you think there's another way he could have handled it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this journey. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this story. Your support means the world.